Thank you very much. Unlike our prior two speakers, I have no slides, and I thought I would focus my remarks on the India file in terms of moving from the why to the how, and paint a little bit of a picture from how this file is lodged in Canada, and then move to the why, from the why to the how, and see what perhaps it means to you and how we should be thinking and acting on this file. Let me just sort of first give you a bit of a strategic context to this. Often in many parts of the West, here I'm referring to the G7 countries, you hear people say, we need to pay attention to India because, it's 1 billion people, English is the lingua franca of business and politics, vibrant middle class, independent judiciary, rule of law, etc., etc. But that's been true since 1947, if not before. But modern India has displayed those traits for a very, very long time. So why should we pay attention to it now? And I think at a cosmic level, the reason why we need to pay attention to it now is it's the first time in India's modern history, and perhaps in the global history, that you see the intersection of the geopolitical with the economic. And that is what makes this period such a fascinating one as you contemplate going global and as you think about, in this case, about India. It is best summed up by a quote from a noted Indian strategic thinker, Raja Mohan, who said about 6 years ago, India is arriving on the world stage as the first large, economically powerful, culturally vibrant, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy outside of the geographic West. And I think that point is really important, outside of the geographic West. And India has eschewed models that you see either from the previous tigers in the 1980s from Asia, whether you think of South Korea, Taiwan, and it has eschewed the model of the former Soviet Union with perestroika and glasnost. The Indian model is a truly unique model. It is a messy democracy, and it's perhaps the only place on the planet where you live 3 centuries at once. Therefore, when you contemplate business strategies, you need to take this into account. So let me start first with six observations I'd make, then a little bit on the play of current state of Canada-India relations, and then move to the how. So the first point is it is unique in part also because of the intersection of cost and quality. You've heard the term frugal innovation, which actually was coined by a CEO of an automaker in specific reference to the Tata Nano car. And often the term frugal in the English language implies cheap or cost efficient, but it is more than that. It is a reference, the word frugal is a reference to smart. And if I may borrow a phrase from a senior member of the Indian government, it actually is innovation. And what that means is, it's a combination of cost, quality, and applicability. So the Tata Nano car has only one windshield wiper because you need only one. The Nokia cell phone has a dust buster, but has a light provision to it because 400 million people in India don't have access to electricity. So it is these kinds of developments. Last week we had the worldwide chairman of GE here, and he made a very interesting point. He's allocated $3 billion to healthcare devices and healthcare-related innovation, specifically for China and India in this case. And a large part of it is for what is referred to at the bottom of the pyramid. The second point I want to make is the Indian economic model as it currently stands, as acknowledged by Indian decision makers, both in the private and the public sector, is unsustainable. It is way too dependent on the services sector. And therefore, the mix in the Indian economy will change with the rise in the manufacturing sector to go from currently 1/6 of the GDP to about 1/4 within the next 10 years. Third point is that when we think of infrastructure in the world, we typically think of hard infrastructure, roads, highways, ports, etc. And in the Indian case, that of course, many of you hail from India, so you know exactly what I mean in terms of the decrepit roads and the reforms that are going to be undertaken over the next 10, 15 years. what is not sufficiently appreciated is that there is a soft infrastructure side to it. And the soft infrastructure is simply this. That is, the challenge in India is omnidirectional. So whether you look at specific skill set, whether you look at requiring more PhDs and everything in between, this is a huge challenge and a huge opportunity in India. Because as we heard from Devdas and we heard from Debarshi earlier on, the demographic dividend plays uniquely so only in the case of India. India in 2050 will continue to be young. Unlike the West, where we're already rapidly aging, and many parts of Asia, and most starkly, as we saw in Devdas' presentation, in the case of Japan. The projections are phenomenal in terms of what's going to happen in Japan, but also in South Korea as well as in China. And what that means is that if you've got 540 million people under the age of 25, as India does right now, opening up education systems and training the next generation of both high-end workers and skilled workers will represent not only a response to India's needs, but the world's needs. And so I think that point with respect to the hard and the soft infrastructure is going to be a fascinating one to watch over the next, I would say, 5 to 7 years. Just to give you a sense of numbers, India is going to quintuple its expenditure on higher education within the next 5 to 7 years. And so for those of you who have potential research linkages, educational collaboration opportunities, this is the time to bear down as you think about going global. The fifth point I want to make is do keep an eye on foreign policy developments. And this really is going to be a critical part of how you should be thinking about the world. And by this, I simply mean that think about, in the case of India, think about the India-US relationship, think about the India-BRICS relationship, and above all, keep an eye on the India-Chinese relationship. The India-China relationship is going to be one marked by simultaneously by collaboration and competition, by paradoxes. You will need to have a high tolerance for ambiguity because nothing will be instantly clear. Here are two countries that 20 years ago traded roughly $250 million with each other, and now are on record of having well surpassed 60 billion, and have stated explicitly that they will look forward to being each other's largest trading partners. Meanwhile, the geopolitical tension is quite palpable, and you know the files. And so with that sort of broad context, let me turn a little bit about why the Canada-India space is so exciting. The Canada-India space is so exciting right now, mainly because the interest in India is omnidirectional. Whether you work in the public sector, broader public sector, NGO community, civil society, opinion maker, ideas community, the private sector, there is a clear indication that things are going to change. Don't be fooled or don't be disappointed by the current modesty in numbers, because the two-way trade between Canada and India is nothing to write home about. It's only about $5 billion. But that, to me, is more a statement of the past and not the promise of the future. Look at the last federal budget in Canada. The only country singled out for explicit attention was India, on two fronts: the Canada-India, the economic partnership discussions, and second, the Canada-India Research Center of Excellence. This is about a multifaceted relationship, and therefore, in whatever sector you reside in, there is an opportunity now, perhaps better than ever before, to start first thinking and then acting on your India-related strategies. And here again, the role of subnational jurisdictions, that is provinces, is very relevant. I'm going to British Columbia this weekend to spend some time on the India file. I just came back from Saskatchewan, which now accounts for 40% of the Canada-India trade. Peas, lentils, the commodity side. Indian companies looking in Alberta at the oil sands, not as well present as the Chinese have, but it is going to happen. It's a matter of time. Canada's smallest province, Prince Edward Island. The Premier of Prince Edward Island has just come back from India. And guess what? An Indian technology company has now announced that they're going to open in Charlottetown, hire 100 people, and the strategy is both for Atlantic Canada and Northeast United States. And of course, in Ontario, we've got a very vibrant presence of Indian companies here. So wherever you reside in Canada, you're going to find the India file is going to come to you. Much is made of the diaspora angle. Canada houses about 1 million people who trace their roots to India, and in that sense, out of 34 million people, it represents on a per capita basis the largest diaspora in the G7 countries. But what is exciting about the Indian diaspora is that it operates, in the case of Canada, as in many other countries, but particularly Canada, in knowledge networks. And I think you are, many of you represent the best of that tradition. And therefore, when the IIT Alumni Association a few years ago in the US decided to hold their first meeting outside of the United States, they chose the Greater Toronto area. Similarly, you now see all kinds of activity taking place, whether if you want the sizzle and you have the IFA Awards here last June, or whether you wanted to see India's largest diaspora conference called Pravasi Bharati Divas take place. Both took place in Toronto, both took place in the month of June, and both represented in different ways the Year of India in Canada. So that gives you a sense of what is happening in terms of the Canada-India space, and I can answer more questions during the Q&A. So if you say, and if it is perhaps facile to say why India, because the India file has now become so obvious, the real question then becomes is how India, and how do you act on India sitting in this part of the world? So here I'd like to make 4 points. My first point is that we must demonstrate an attitudinal shift. Whether you look at the PwC reports, whether you look at Boston Consulting's seminal report called as the Next 100 Global Challengers, there are enough reports out there that point to the seismic change that's taking place in the economic space. Or just listen to our Governor of the Bank of Canada, who day before yesterday gave a speech in Kitchener talking about how we need to think about, in particular, the BRICS countries. But the BCG report in 2006 said the following, and let me summarize. It said, we need to pay attention to the next 100 companies. And these are not at all obvious as to who they are. And perhaps 5-10 years from now, many of you will represent that very ambition. And of the top 100, 65 were from China and India. Of the 65, 44 were from China and 21 were from India. What's interesting in the Indian example is of the 21 companies, only 5 were technology companies. And this is what I mean by an attitudinal shift, because our knowledge of the India file in this part of the world is still largely shaped by the technology story, even though it has moved well beyond that. Business Week Asia, had released a list a few years ago talking about the top 50 Asian companies. And of the top 50, 12 were from India. Interestingly, only 1 was from the technology space. So there again, you see the change happening. The second point I'd like to make in the Canadian context as we think about India, and this speaks perhaps to the Indian stereotype of Canada. Great country, resources, commodities, also true, as we know. But the play is as well on technology. Recently, a very senior Indian official from the Indian Mining Ministry was in Canada, and he made the following point. He said, in India, we can drill down to mines of 600 meters. And according to him, Canada and Australia were 2 of the countries in which you have drilling technology that goes down 1 kilometer. So if you're in that space, and if you think about mining, don't think of it simply as an extraction play or a resource play. It's as much a technology play. We have a company in Newfoundland that's looking at sonar technology, both in terms of commercial fishery, but as well as servicing India's defense needs. India, as you know, is a country in which it has got a fabulous coastline of 7,500 kilometers. So this is very much a relevant Canadian expertise. For those of you who I know operate in the VC space, think about two former employees from Google who set up a company in the agri-technology space. They hired 12 PhDs. And what they did was, in the US, they looked at the weather patterns as determined by the National Weather Service of the US for the last 30 years. These 12 PhDs did, with the support of the two Google executives. And they are now able to predict weather patterns in terms of what it means to the farmer in Iowa and what it means to the farmer in the Midwest in the US. But they're not obviously limiting their aspirations to just the American Midwest. They're thinking about the world, and they're thinking about China and India in this case. Many Indian companies are at the forefront of this intersection of technology and crop insurance, for example. Only 15% of Indian farmers have crop insurance. So all of this, in my humble estimation, means that we have to have an attitudinal shift, and we got to get on with the program. It also means, for those of you who come from a liberal arts background, as I come from a liberal arts background, I was taught, I grew up in India and I grew up here, and I was taught in this part of the world that October 1962 was a seismic month. It was a seismic month because that's the month in which we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in this part of the world. But it was also the month in which India and China were at war within 10 days of each other, within 10 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fast forward to December 2004. Two very important figures in Asia died in December 2004. One was the former Prime Minister of India at the time of 1991, which is an epochal year because that's the year in which India liberalized its policies, and he died. His name was Narasimha Rao. And when he died, there was a rich debate as to whether was he good for the country, bad for the country, should he have a state funeral, etc. The same month, Zhao Ziyang died in China. And he was the leader in the Communist Party who backed the students at the time of the Tiananmen Square demonstrations in 1989. Both died in the same month, and yet we didn't hear a peep about it in this part of the world. And I think that is where we need to, again, start learning more about what is going on in Asia and how does that impact us. Because these now are not just potentially regional issues, they are global issues. My final 3 points would be simply this. Number one, and you heard this in Devarshi's presentation, when you think about India, it is critical to have a local partner. Invest your time in finding the right local partner. And email is not helpful. Whatever you have, if you can, make a trip. Because there's nothing like making a trip and understanding firsthand. And you can do this not just by yourself, but there are enough organizations here that go on a frequent basis to India. Latch on to one of them. Have your own program, but also see what parts make sense. My second point would be is, for those of you who are connected to civil society and the NGO community, tap into them because they've got some stunning contacts in India. Here I'm thinking people, not just in the NGO civil society, but think of it in the broader public sector, hospitals, universities, colleges. You'd be surprised how rich a source of information and contacts they are. And my final point would be simply this, which is, whatever you have, please invest it disproportionately. And invest it disproportionately at the front end. That's what will help you jump the queue. That's what will help you get the attention of potential prospective business partners in India. I thank you for your attention, and I'll answer any questions that you may have. Yes?
So you mentioned that in India's industry right now, the technology is focused, right? And when we talk about technology, how about what is the proportion of weight in intellectual property?
I mean, you know, I think that side is a story in progress, and in fact, there what you see happening is that, you know, China signed up first to the intellectual property regime. India signed up more recently, but you have a new phenomenon which is actually uniquely Indian, And it's particularly so in the pharmaceutical industry, where you see the term called branded generics. We in this part of the world, we had heard about generics and we had heard about branded multinationals. But the notion of branded generics is a unique Indian contribution, more relevant in the last 5 to 7 years. So I'd say it's a work in progress. I actually want to draw your attention to a fabulous study that came out literally 2 months ago. If you just go to asiapacificfoundation.ca, and the name of the person is Dr. Rezai, R-E-Z-A-I-E. And he has written a report on the nature of innovation from Asia, in which he tackles this question head on. So you may want to take a look at it, because he looks at the China-India story in particular.
Okay, good translation.
Yeah.
Hi. A very good presentation. I was just curious, I know Manmohan Singh, when he was here for the G20, they were having discussions on the free trade. I was wondering if you could maybe speak to Canada and India's free trade relationship and where you see it going, and what would you say are the top opportunities, if you will, once it is initiated?
Thank you for that question. You're right. It actually, following when Dr. Singh was here in June of 2010, subsequently there was another meeting in Seoul with the G20, and that's where they made the announcement in November of 2010 to launch what something is called as Canada-India Economic Partnership Agreement. It's euphemistically referred to as the CEPA agreement. You can hear me at the back, right? No? So maybe I should go back to the mic. So the CEPA agreement is the stated goal of completion is 2013, which is not far off, which is next year. My advice is, I think we keep an eye on it. Both countries have got their chief negotiators appointed. They have met 5 times already. So from our side, there's a fantastic veteran Canadian trade diplomat by the name of Don Stephenson. And from the Indian side, there's a person by the name of Dr. Anup Vadhavan, PhD at Duke University, gets the file completely, no stranger to Canada. But I would say also, in part, don't hold your breath for this, because there's a lot of these are just the early rounds, and that's gone well. The political support at this stage has been impressive, in the sense that both countries are saying that we should get this completed. The statement from the Canadian side is that we want to complete EU, and then next year complete India. But remember, we've been talking with Singapore since 2000, right? So that's a long time. So I think services, agriculture, these would be some of the issues. I don't know how the financial services side is going to play out. On the financial services side, the view was India was to liberalize in 2009, which is kind of got hamstrung right now. But it's really the combination of a number of things. There is also discussions taking place on a social security agreement between the two countries. There's also a discussion, which is pretty well near completion, on the Canada-India Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Agreement. And there is now, expected visits from our side by the Prime Minister of Canada to India. We don't know when that's going to happen, but that's good. So all of that will bring discipline and further focus to these many initiatives taking place.
Any more questions? Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.